The last line I scratched into the wall of my room at Maplewood Memory Care was not a tally mark. It was a date. The date everything my daughter and her husband had stolen from me would finally be taken back. I used the cap of a ballpoint pen I had hidden inside the spine of a Bible on my nightstand. The nurses checked my belongings every Thursday, but nobody looks twice at a Bible. I had learned that in the first week. My name is not important. What I am is a 71-year-old man who spent 43 years building a precision manufacturing company from a rented garage in Dayton, Ohio, into a business that employed over 300 people and supplied parts to 3 of the largest aerospace contractors in the country. I worked 6 days a week for most of my adult life. I missed school plays and anniversaries and my wife's last birthday before the cancer took her because I was always at the plant or on a plane to meet a client. I am not proud of all of that. But I built something real, something that had my family's name on it. And I watched my daughter and the man she married gut it piece by piece while I sat in a room that smelled like disinfectant and overcooked green beans, with a bracelet on my wrist that beeped if I walked too close to the door. I need you to understand how I ended up there before you can understand what I did about it. My wife passed 3 years before any of this happened. 17 months after we buried her, I had a minor cardiac episode at the plant. My cardiologist called it a warning. 2 blocked arteries, a stent procedure, 6 days in the hospital. I was back at my desk in less than 3 weeks, but the episode frightened my daughter in a way I did not anticipate. She started calling twice a day. She started driving up from Cincinnati on weekends uninvited. She started talking about what she called the future with a tone in her voice that I recognized from the years I had spent in negotiations, the tone of someone who has already made a decision and is only pretending to seek your input. Her husband is a corporate attorney. I had never fully trusted him. He was the kind of man who smiled at you with his whole face but kept his eyes working separately, calculating. When my daughter first brought him home, my wife had whispered to me in the kitchen that he reminded her of a man who reads every contract twice before signing it, and once more after. I thought that was a good quality at the time. I understand now what she actually meant. 3 months after my cardiac procedure, my daughter sat down with me in my living room and told me she was worried. She said I needed someone to manage the complexity of my affairs. She said it lovingly. She said it with her hand on mine. She said that as my only child, and as someone who loved me, she felt it was her responsibility to make sure I was protected. She had a document with her. Her husband had prepared it. It was a durable power of attorney, broad in its language, covering financial decisions, medical decisions, and business operations. She told me it was temporary. She told me it was just a precaution. She told me I could revoke it any time I chose. I signed it. I am not going to pretend I didn't. I signed it because she was my daughter and I loved her, and I had just spent 6 days in a hospital bed thinking about the fact that my wife was already gone and I did not want to leave my child with a mess. That is the honest answer. Within 60 days of that signature, my daughter and her husband had retained a neurologist who had never treated me, examined my medical records from the hospital stay, and produced a written opinion suggesting that my cardiac episode may have been accompanied by a hypoxic event affecting cognitive function. They used that opinion to initiate a competency evaluation. The evaluator they selected was a woman who spent 45 minutes with me asking me to remember 3 words, draw a clock face, and count backward from 100. She noted in her report that I became, in her words, irritable and resistant when questioned about financial matters. She was not wrong. I became irritable and resistant because I understood exactly what was happening. The competency hearing was in a county court 30 miles from my home. My daughter sat at the petitioner's table in a gray dress and cried. Her husband sat beside her looking appropriately grave. I had retained my own attorney, a man I had worked with for years on business matters. But the process moved faster than either of us had anticipated, and the neurologist's report carried more weight than my attorney's objections. The judge appointed my daughter as my legal guardian and conservator. He said it was in my best interest. He said it with the tone of a man who had made this same decision many times and felt entirely comfortable with it. I was moved to Maplewood Memory Care in Columbus 14 days later. My daughter told the intake coordinator that I had shown signs of paranoia and resistance to care. She said it in front of me. She said it without looking at me. The first night I lay in that room and looked at the ceiling and did not sleep. Not because I was frightened, because I was thinking. I had made a mistake. I understood that clearly. I had trusted the wrong person with my vulnerability, and she had used it with a precision that told me the plan had been forming for a long time before she sat down across from me with that document. The man she married had written that power of attorney to be as broad as possible. The neurologist had been selected rather than consulted. The timing, coming so quickly after my procedure, before I had fully recovered my energy, had not been accidental. But I had not been entirely unaware. 2 weeks before my daughter came to me with the power of attorney document, 2 weeks, as though I had been warned somehow, which I had not, only perhaps I simply knew her better than she knew I did. I had called my attorney and my accountant into my office and made 3 decisions that I had been considering for some time. The first was to gift 17% of my company's stock to my nephew, my wife's sister's son, who had worked at the plant for 11 years and understood the business as well as anyone alive. I transferred those shares outright, not in trust, not contingent on anything. They were his the moment the paperwork cleared. The second was to establish a separate legal entity, a holding company based in Delaware, that owned the lease on our primary manufacturing facility and the intellectual property for 6 of our most valuable proprietary processes. That entity had 2 members, myself and my attorney, as trustee, with specific instructions that governed what could and could not be done with those assets without my personal written consent on paper. I had pre-signed and held in his office safe. The third was a letter, sealed, notarized, held by my attorney, with instructions that it was to be delivered to my nephew on a specific date, a date I calculated based on how long I believed I would be in a conservatorship before the legal process could be reversed. I chose 18 months as my estimate. I was off by 3 weeks. I did not tell my daughter any of this. I want to be precise about what life at Maplewood looked like, because I think it matters. I was not mistreated in a dramatic way. The staff were, most of them, decent people doing a job. My room was clean. The meals were adequate. There was a common room with a television and a puzzle table where a retired school teacher named Harold and I played chess on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and he beat me more than I beat him. I was allowed phone calls, but my outgoing calls were logged, and my daughter had requested that I not be given access to a personal cell phone, citing what she called my history of impulsive financial decisions. The landline in my room connected to the front desk before it connected anywhere outside the facility. There was a night orderly named Marcus who worked the 11 to 7 shift 3 nights a week. Marcus was saving money to go back to school. I knew this because Marcus talked during his rounds if you were awake and willing to listen, and I was always awake. Over the course of about 4 months, Marcus and I developed what I would call a friendship, and Marcus, who was 26 years old and had a practical, unsentimental view of the world, eventually agreed to mail 2 letters for me from a mailbox 3 blocks from the facility. He did not ask what was in them. I did not tell him. I paid him with cash that I had kept in the lining of my winter coat, which no one had thought to search. The first letter went to my attorney. It confirmed that the date in the sealed envelope was still my intention and that the instructions had not changed. The second letter went to a journalist at the Columbus Dispatch who covered business and white-collar legal affairs. I had read her work for years. She was methodical and fair, and she did not write stories that could not be substantiated. I wrote to her not to tell her a story, but to tell her where to look and what she would find when she looked there. I gave her the name of the neurologist my daughter had retained, the name of my daughter's husband's firm, and the name of the judge who had presided over my competency hearing, who had, I had since learned, been appointed to the bench through a process in which my son-in-law's firm had made a significant contribution to a relevant political campaign. I sealed that letter and I went to sleep, and for the first time since arriving at Maplewood, I slept without difficulty. The competency determination had a built-in review at 18 months. This was standard. My attorney had flagged it from the beginning and had been preparing for it from the day I arrived at the facility, even without my letters, because he is a thorough man, and he had known me for 22 years, and he had never believed for a moment that I was incapacitated. At the 18-month review, he presented 3 things: an independent neuropsychological evaluation conducted by a specialist at Ohio State who found no evidence of cognitive impairment, a sworn statement from Harold, the chess player, attesting to the quality of our ongoing games and conversations, and a deposition from my plant manager describing a phone call I had made to him from the facility's landline 6 weeks after my arrival, in which I had correctly identified and solved a production scheduling problem that had stumped the engineering team for 2 days. My daughter's attorney objected to all of it. The judge at the review hearing was not the same judge who had presided over the original hearing. She was a woman in her late 50s who read every document placed before her with the kind of focused attention that makes you understand immediately that she will not be managed. She vacated the guardianship order in its entirety. She cited procedural irregularities in the original hearing and the absence of any credible current evidence of incapacity. She did not say in her ruling that she found the original proceedings suspicious, but she scheduled a follow-up conference and ordered that a court investigator review the selection process for both the original neurologist and the evaluator. I walked out of Maplewood Memory Care on a Tuesday morning in early October. My attorney was waiting in the parking lot with a car. Marcus was working the morning shift, and he shook my hand at the door. I told him I hoped school went well. He said he hoped things went well for me too, and I said they would. My daughter and her husband did not come to the facility that morning. I had expected that. They had been informed of the ruling the day before, and they were, according to my attorney, in an emergency meeting at their house in Cincinnati. I thought about what that meeting must have looked like, and I felt nothing in particular. I had spent 18 months feeling things. That morning I was finished with feeling and interested only in what happened next. What happened next had been set in motion before I ever arrived at Maplewood. The holding company that owned my plant's lease and the key intellectual property had never been touched. My son-in-law had discovered it approximately 4 months into the conservatorship and had spent considerable effort trying to access it, but the structure I had put in place with my attorney made that impossible without my personal consent, which I had declined to provide when my daughter's attorney sent a formal request that my attorney forwarded to me through proper channels. I had written a 1-sentence response on a note card and mailed it back. The sentence was, "No." The 17% of company stock I had gifted to my nephew had, during the 18 months of my absence, made him a significant voice in company governance. My daughter, as conservator, had controlled my majority share, but she had not controlled his. And he had used those 18 months carefully, building relationships with the board members I had appointed over the years, people who had worked with me for decades and who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the direction my son-in-law was pushing the company. When I walked back into the plant on the Thursday after my release, 3 board members met me in the lobby. My nephew was with them. Nobody cried. We did not make speeches. We sat down in the conference room and we worked. My son-in-law had, during the conservatorship, attempted to negotiate a sale of the company to a private equity firm based in Atlanta. He had gotten as far as a letter of intent, but the sale required the cooperation of the holding company, which he did not control, and a 2/3 board vote, which he did not have. The deal had stalled, and the private equity firm had grown impatient, and the letter of intent had lapsed 1 week before I walked out of Maplewood. I do not believe that timing was accidental. I believe my nephew, who is a more patient and more strategic person than I have ever given him credit for, had understood exactly what he was doing. The journalist at the Columbus Dispatch published her first story 11 days after my release. It was careful, factual, and devastating. It described the relationship between my son-in-law's firm and the judge who had presided over my original hearing. It described the financial arrangement between the neurologist who had reviewed my records and a consulting firm that my son-in-law had helped establish 2 years prior. It described 3 other cases in which similar arrangements had produced similar outcomes for elderly individuals with significant assets. My case was not named in that first story. The others were. I did not speak to my daughter during any of this. She called the morning the article published. I let it go to voicemail. She called again that afternoon, and I let that go too. Her message was not an apology. It was a request for a meeting, delivered in the careful, modulated voice of a woman who had consulted with her attorney before picking up the phone. I did not respond. My son-in-law's firm placed him on administrative leave within 2 weeks of the first story. The Ohio State Bar Association opened an investigation. The court investigator appointed by the review judge filed a preliminary report that characterized the original competency proceeding as, in her words, procedurally compromised. My attorney filed a civil suit against my son-in-law individually, against his firm, against the neurologist, and against my daughter in her capacity as former conservator. The suit detailed 18 months of decisions made on my behalf that had systematically disadvantaged my company and enriched entities connected to my son-in-law's professional network. I did not attend the press conference my attorney held on the day the suit was filed. I was at the plant. I had a production meeting at 9 o'clock and a vendor review at 11 and a lunch with a client from Denver who had been waiting patiently through all of this to renegotiate our contract. I sat across from him at a table in the same conference room where I had spent thousands of hours over 40 years, and I talked about tolerances and lead times and delivery schedules, and I felt, for the first time since my wife died, like myself. There is something I have thought about in the months since all of this resolved, or began to resolve, because the legal process is slow and some of it is still ongoing. I have thought about the moment I signed the power of attorney. I have thought about it honestly, not to punish myself, but to understand it. I signed it because I loved her, because I was tired in a way that the cardiac procedure had made visible, but had actually been accumulating for years. Because I had spent 43 years building something and the maintenance of it was exhausting in a way I had not fully admitted to myself. And there was a part of me, I think, that was relieved to hand some of the weight to someone else. She knew that. She had watched me long enough to know exactly where I was soft. What I did not adequately account for was the man she had chosen. I had reservations about him from the beginning, and I suppressed those reservations because she loved him and because I did not want to be the kind of father who stood in the way of his daughter's life. I mistook my willingness to accept him for wisdom. It was not wisdom. It was avoidance. I do not know yet what I will do with the relationship. My attorney tells me that some resolution will be required before the civil case concludes, and that my daughter, unlike her husband, is unlikely to face criminal exposure. She was complicit, he says, but she was also, in some sense, managed. I am not sure those two things are as different as he suggests, but I am also not sure they are the same. What I know is this. I spent 18 months in a room I did not choose, stripped of the legal right to make decisions about my own life, watching a man I had never trusted dismantle something I had built across most of my adult years, and I did not break. I did not break because I had prepared. I had prepared not out of paranoia, but out of the same instinct that had kept my company alive through 2 recessions and a global supply chain collapse. The instinct that tells you to build redundancies before you need them, to secure what matters before anyone else can reach it. To trust the structure you build more than the promises people make. My nephew runs day-to-day operations now. He is better at it than I was in some ways and worse in others, and that is exactly how it should be. I come in 3 days a week. I walk the floor and talk to the machinists and sit in on the production meetings, and occasionally I solve a problem that the younger people have been staring at too long to see clearly. Harold from Maplewood and I have coffee once a month. He still beats me at chess. The bracelet they put on my wrist at intake, the one that beeped when I walked too close to the door, they gave it back to me in a plastic bag with my other belongings the morning I left. I still have it. I keep it in the top drawer of my desk at the plant, under a stack of old contracts, next to a photograph of my wife taken in our backyard in the summer of 1987. I do not keep it as a reminder of what was done to me. I keep it as a reminder of what I did not do. I did not panic. I did not beg. I did not spend 18 months grieving a situation I could not immediately change. I spent 18 months doing what I have always done, working the problem, protecting what mattered, waiting for the moment when everything I had quietly put in place would be exactly enough. That moment came on a Tuesday morning in early October, in a parking lot outside a memory care facility in Columbus, when my attorney handed me a cup of coffee and the keys to a car and told me that the judge's order had been entered into the record and that we had work to do. We did. We do. And if my daughter is listening to this, if she found this somehow and recognized the shape of it, I have not forgotten who you were before him. I have not forgotten the girl who used to fall asleep in the passenger seat on long drives and wake up pretending she had been awake the whole time. I have not forgotten the phone call I got when you passed your bar exam and how proud I was, a pride so large I did not know what to do with it. I carry all of that. But I also carry 18 months in a room with a beeping bracelet and the knowledge that you sat across from a judge and let a lie be told about your father's mind. Those things are going to have to find a way to exist alongside each other for whatever time I have left. I am 71 years old. I buried my wife. I built something from nothing. I survived my own daughter. I think I can manage the rest.